Welcome to Who Cares, the podcast that embarks on a profound journey into the heart of empathy and indifference in our modern era. Each episode of Who Cares brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests from various industries and walks of life. But Who Cares goes beyond individual stories. We dive into the larger societal and psychological undercurrents that have led to a perceived decline in collective empathy. Who Cares isn't just a podcast. It's a powerful call to action for reigniting the spirit of empathy within each of us. Let's find the answer to Who Cares together. Welcome to Who Cares. Welcome back to Who Cares. Today we talk to Heather Bland, the CEO of My Refuge House. We started this kind of a brainstorming about things that have been going on in the community, things I noticed mostly post-pandemic, about how people seem to be very disconnected, almost zombie-like. They weren't talking to people, or you go into a store and it's people just seem to be going through the motions. Didn't see a lot of passion in people about their jobs and their existence. And it started to really affect me, and I wanted to know how I might be contributing to that in my own, way in my own community. And so I started asking a lot of questions and wondering if other people were noticing this, and if there was just like a general depression, or if going, because of the pandemic, people were kind of going more inward and not expressing themselves and not connecting to other people. So it all kind of originated out of that. And the troubled feeling I kept feeling from it, and wanting to, I guess, because being a natural therapist, wanting to ask people, even going in the grocery store, are you having a bad day? What's going on? Or, wanting to connect with people and really finding it difficult to do so.
Yes.
So, that's what kind of brought this forward. And so I'm wanting to talk to people in general who seem to still have this really strong passion and drive and motivation to do these things, as I'm learning more and more about you, and engagement with the world on that level, and maybe to drum up the excitement, or to see if I'm missing something, you know. So maybe if you could start off and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, and where that kind of passion lies for you.
Sure. So I am the CEO of My Refuge House, is my full-time job. I always say my professional identity is family therapist. And so I bring that kind of lens and a spirit of family therapy to all things. In grad school, I started telling people that I was not a therapist in all things, but I hoped that I would be therapeutic in all things. So, My Refuge House is a residential therapeutic home in the Philippines for girls who've been rescued from trafficking. Wow. So we're in Cebu, which is the Queen City of the South. It's just this really beautiful, amazing place. And my team there are all Filipino with one Peace Corps volunteer. And then in the United States, it's me and one part-time person who lives in Texas. Wow. And I'm an extrovert. So when I got this job, the team that I'd been working with in Chicago, and we'd been referred to as a hug by certain people around us, they were a little nervous for me because I suddenly was going remote before the world had gone remote. That was back in 2015. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I think I'm somebody who just loves to have feelings, and I laugh easily, I cry easily, and I find that it's more fun to enjoy the world in that way. And I feel like my role as a therapist and as a leader and as a parent and as a wife is to try to create spaces where everybody gets to be their whole selves and bring all of their feelings and share those with people.
So, but I'm thinking this type of work, it might be a challenge to find hope a lot.
Yeah, I always say we're actually on the hopeful side of the business, because we don't actually do any of the rescue, which I think that would wear on me, I think, to have that acute level of connection. But we are with girls and families as they're on a journey of restoration, a journey of hope and healing. One of the things I've also, to just go weirdly philosophical for a second, I kind of think that, like, I guess the more I explore things, the more I think that the meaning of life is wrapped up in our ability to hold complex feelings at the same time, that we can feel happy and sad at the same time, that we can feel all of that. And as I've gotten to know, I'm not Filipino. I don't know if you noticed. But so it's always funny to me on some level that here I am, the CEO of a nonprofit in the Philippines. And so I've tried to lead with a lot of curiosity. And as I've done that, and as we've kind of gotten to know and elevate the culture to be at the heart of what we do, my team really have done a lot to say, hey, look, we're a people of resilience and we're a people of joy. And that is the thing that I realized, that like on our campus, it is a place where kids instantly feel safe. And in that way, they can kind of open up to some of the deeper feelings, but they also open up to just this natural joyfulness that comes with seeing that life exists beyond trauma.
How do you think you cultivate that in your team too?
I think it's naturally there, and so it's easier to just kind of attend and attune to that. I think it's a faith-based organization, so for a lot of them, it really grows out of their sense of faith too, that they're part of something bigger, that they're not in it alone. That connection that you're talking about, I think, is something that we actively nurture. In fact, so before I started almost 10 years ago, we went through a big restructuring. We had been doing therapy that by Western standards had been researched and found to be supportive for trauma, and was really causing some problems on our campus because it was just bumping into the culture of the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
And so we had there was a woman who went in and kind of helped our team. Her name's Doc Yvonne. Doc Yvonne went in and helped our team kind of deconstruct everything, and then rebuild from the culture. And so I think in that sense, it's the same way I do therapy, I think, where it's just like, what do you have? What do you bring to the table, and how do we use that?
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it becomes a lot more natural, and you're not trying to like force somebody to feel something or do something that's not natural to them. And if it gets in the way, then it's more of like, well, let's just set this to the side for a second and figure out how we can reframe and reshape it to come back to the table. We're not going to chuck it out. So I think we do that with our team, and we are very focused on tuning into each other. I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach too, and I read that.
Yeah. Maybe you could tell me a little more about that.
So for me, my first exposure to Clifton Strengths. Do you know anything? So
I'm not real familiar. Yeah.
Somebody's going to watch this and be like, she's screwing this up even though she's certified. But my kind of take on it was my postgraduate work was all in resilience-based therapy. And I was in this agency in Chicago for almost 15 years, and was kind of moving up the ranks of leadership. But there wasn't a ton of leadership development immediately, like when I first started doing that. And luckily I had this wonderful friend who brought in the Gallup organization. And Clifton Strengths is basically developed by this guy, Don Clifton, who's kind of the grandfather of positive psychology. And his thing was, hey, look, for decades we've studied what's wrong with people. What would happen if we studied what's right with people?
Wow.
And
Interesting.
What they've discovered is that it's actually in the areas where we already have natural talent, where we have the ability to grow the most. We're thinking of like Olympic athletes, which I'm probably not going to be an Olympic athlete, but those Olympic athletes, if you show any Olympic athlete a video of themselves and talk through some mechanics, they will make some exponential growth in how
Yeah.
they do things. For me, I may or may not land on my feet if I'm tumbling, right? Like, and so Clifton Strengths is kind of this assessment tool where you can go through and figure out what are your strengths, what are your natural talents in the way that you show up, not what you do, but how you do things.
Yeah.
So for example, my number one Clifton strength is woo, which stands for winning others over. And it basically means put me in a room full of strangers and it's like a kid in a candy store. Like I'm so excited and energized to be there. That's great to know, but what Clifton Strength says is now you have to like develop that. Like that's what you do. So I'm, as a kid I was naturally talking to people, but as a parent, I was kind of thinking about how does this show up as a parent. And I was reading another book about strengths-based parenting by them and went to the playground and realized, all of the other parents who are standing on the periphery, I just assumed they didn't want to talk. But to realize, no, they just don't take social initiative. Like it doesn't come naturally to them.
Right.
And so I was holding myself back because I thought, they just wanted a quiet day at the park with their kid. And it's like, that's not what they want. Yeah. So then it starts to kind of take on a life of its own where you start to kind of figure out, okay, when can I use this? When do I not use this? And there's a leadership idea that you can't be a well-rounded individual, but you can be a well-rounded team. And so like, I can't do all the things. And are there ways that I can bring other people in to fill in the areas where I'm just not going to have as much natural ability?
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a really great tool.
It's a great tool.
Yeah. And
it really it brought kind of that leadership framework into my therapeutic framework to help, because at the time, the agency where I worked, people were getting written, like if people messed up, you'd get written up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to write them up. I hired them and I don't think that they're just screwing up. I think they don't know what they're doing. I think they need support.
Yeah.
And so it gave me this tool for developing people rather than managing people.
Right. So that must be very empowering.
Yes, it's very empowering, and I've brought it to all things in terms of the team in the Philippines or my family.
Yeah.
It's also just a helpful add-on to a framework for living, I think.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have a couple kids?
I do. I have a 11-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And they, on some level, could not be more different. I always say, I've been saying, one is literal and the other figurative. And I'm like, oh no, one is the director and the other is the diva. Like they're kind of like, they both have bigger personalities. One tends to be very deep and kind of serious in his thought. The older one is, he's got an engineering mind, but kind of a therapeutic heart, which is really sweet to watch.
Yeah.
But he rolls his eyes when I cry. He's just
Wow.
like, not in a way that he's like fed up with me crying. He's just like, well, that was predictable.
Yeah.
Because he's
Here it comes
like,
again.
Yeah, there she is,
It's
emoting.
Yeah.
And then the 11-year-old is just a big ball of energy. And he likes to remind me that he chose me over Lady Gaga to be his mom. So I'm like, great. So
That's terrific.
like, I don't fully understand what you're saying, but I'll take it.
So do you see the passion coming through in them for the things they're interested in, or do you see a dampering in that at all?
Karma is a terrible thing, right?
Yeah.
Because the engineering kid is obsessed with roller coasters and talks all things roller coasters. Oh, wow. And creates metaphors already out of roller coasters and video, like they do overlap with some of their gaming. And then the younger one has recently become very obsessed with anime. And so like I went to Anime Expo.
Oh, nice.
I'm like, I didn't know a person could talk so long about anime or roller coasters. Yeah.
Seminars and all
that.
Right.
Yeah. I get those on the couch every night.
That's terrific.
The younger one yesterday goes, we were in the car for a while, and he goes, what would you like to talk about, Mom? And I was like, And he goes, I can tell that you're getting tired of hearing me talk about anime. So I was
great.
Like, well, I should maybe be more interested in your anime. So
No, but interesting that
Yeah.
he can reach out and
Yeah,
see that happening. Yeah. No, it's terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Called me on it a little bit.
Yeah.
No, it's fun, and I think that they both have an ability to bring in different types of people to their circle too, so they don't tend to have one clique of friends, which is fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the work you do, are you part of developing the programs for the Refuge House?
Yeah, so I on some level I'm kind of a consultant, and I mean at the end of the day the buck stops with me.
Yeah.
But I always say I would never do anything or implement anything that didn't kind of come from, we have these two amazing directors, Roseanne and Omar, who I always say have the perfect professional marriage. Like, they balance each other out. They're just very thoughtful. Yeah. And Roseanne is our clinical director. She's able to kind of see things programmatically. She's a social worker, and just a really brilliant mind when it comes to therapeutic work. And so most of the therapeutic ideas come from her and one other staff person we have, Jed's. And then it's been fun because I've recently been able to have a few more conversations with them. I think they're ready to have some affirmation about the program that we've built, because we feel like we're doing good work.
Yeah.
And we're a small program. And so it's like, well, why is this working? And we want to be able to share. We've been consulting with some other organizations to try to help them to build their program too. Wow. And so that's been a fun thing to start to pull in some of my larger network and ideas around different types of therapy that's emerging with trauma, and kind of point out, look, this isn't what we call it, but it's been well researched and documented by a different name out of the Trauma Institute, or there are things that are happening.
Excuse me.
So that's been a fun. I mean, we're all kind of therapy nerds, so we get into those conversations.
So I got distracted earlier. You had brought up how therapy might be very culturally different in the Philippines than it is here. I'd really love to hear more about how that took hold and the changes you had to make, and maybe some of the differences you were seeing.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about, Filipino culture is very communal, right? And then you layer on that we had a residential therapeutic home, which is very communal. Everybody's just kind of on top of each other. And there's, like, I always laugh that, like, in order to drive in the Philippines, you must be psychic, because, like, I'm just like, I don't understand how, like, everything's just kind of in flow. And basically what was happening originally was a therapist would come and it's the same kind of model that happens in the United States. And I honestly feel like the U.S. models could learn something from what we're doing, because you take a girl out of the community and you take her to individual therapy, and then you talk to her about her trauma, and we talked about her triggers. Like, there's a lot of, it's, kind of the CBT work of trauma work. But what that would end up doing was kind of activating some of that trauma. And then you put her back into the milieu, and all the other little empaths that are around her pick up on that. And so now the flow is off. And so we were having high levels of incidence, and, there was all of the things that people worry about happening in residential care were starting to exist. And that's like, we don't want to cause more trauma.
Right.
And so one of the things that we did was we started doing a lot more group work, a lot more experiential work. And then I have access to files. I can read their trauma history. But the other thing that we did was two people on our staff know what's in a file before the girl arrives. They know the trauma story that some other professional has written, right? Like, the girls aren't writing that story. And nobody else reads that. We all know they've been through trauma.
Right.
And my thing is, who are we to think that this little file that someone else has written would even suggest half the work that needs to be done? And one of the things that we do is when the girl arrives is basically just let her know that from this point forward, it's your story. Yeah. We are not going to poke and prod. We are here to hold and heal. And so she then is, from that point forward, in charge of when it comes out, when she talks about it. The exception comes with if she's got a court date. Yeah. And then we start to kind of navigate and help her to figure out how she's going to deal with that. Mm-hmm. But from day one, we're modeling that it's her story. Yeah. And what that has done is it has also, I think, removed a level of vicarious trauma that happens with staff, because they don't have to read the details of a trauma story. Yeah. Because it doesn't, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter for them to know that detail. No. And what matters is what the girl ends up deciding that means for her and what comes out from that. So in that sense, we were able to kind of protect the sense of community. I always think of like strengths-based therapy as being like, it's not denying that trauma happens. It's more of like you've happened upon a scene of a collapsed building, and you're sifting through it to figure out what do we have to work with and work on and work toward. Yeah. It's not so much of like the forensic evidence of like what happened here, unless that's helpful to prevent it as you're building it. But that's further down the road after you've got some building blocks. Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing too with strength-based training or models that you can build a foundation, and then it does allow the safety at that point for them to express themselves or for that trauma to, come through.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I'm doing a couple therapy sessions just privately now, and one of the young people I was meeting with was like, I know this hard thing is coming. I can't talk about that hard thing yet. Like, I'm not in a place where I can do that. And I was like, that's okay. Let's start with strengths coaching. Yeah. And that was really cool because it was like, let's build you up so that you can, that the hard thing is coming. Right. So let's build you up so that you know all of your tools, so that when the hard thing comes, it'll still be hard. Right. But you can better navigate
something to hold on to. Yeah. In the meantime.
Yeah. And then the hard thing happened, and now we're doing the deeper therapeutic work of digging in. But she's more equipped to do that.
Yeah. So how does that all work with the families? Do you bring the families into treatment, or are they completely separated from that at this point?
Yeah, no. So one of the reasons that I was hired was because my role in Chicago, in working with the residential treatment facility that worked there, I'd moved into our program that worked with the families and the communities after the kids left our program. Okay. And so I was doing some community development, some family work, and My Refuge House was starting to do that too. Because basically the girls were coming, and they were staying with us for a while. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, well, where are they going after this? And realizing that there's a gap. Right. And similar to the United States, especially like foster care, and like we remove children, but we don't build the structures that will then hold them after they're young adults. And we all need continued help. Right. And so at My Refuge House, we now, from day one, we're getting to know who's the family that you're going to be going back to. Mm-hmm. Or going on to. It might not even be family that they've lived with before, but we're investing in that work. And that's been really helpful because in the last few years, the age of girls has actually gotten younger. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we first started, most of the girls who came to My Refuge House were 14, 15, were off the streets, had run away from home, or were kind of trying to do something more independent in order to take care of their families. But over time, online trafficking has kind of escalated, and so that targets younger kids, often kids from their families. And so there's a lot more family work to be done in order for families to understand what even happened. Yeah. But also, if you have a 14 or 15-year-old and you're keeping her until independence, that's one thing. But if you have a 10-year-old and you're keeping her to independence, that's institutionalization, and that's not helpful for them or for society. Right. And so that's where we've really started to do a lot deeper work in terms of like we're doing some family livelihood development and also scholarships for siblings.
Wow.
So that when the girls leave, they're not the only ones who've been pursuing education. And now there's a culture of education at home.
Wow, that's terrific.
It's been really amazing to watch.
So it kind of ripple effect spreads.
And I just came back from the Philippines a couple weeks ago, and we had an alumni dinner, and it was really fun because I watched two of our alums. One of them asked the other one, she was like, can I get some bus fare? And I was like, I love that. Like, she didn't ask the staff and we would have given her bus fare, but she asked her sister, her My Refuge House sister for bus fare. I was like, that's what we hope, is that we're hoping that we're building this kind of sisterhood that lasts beyond their time living with us.
That they create other relationships outside.
Yeah, that they're naturally occurring. Some of our older alums are helping each other raise families and, like, let's get you to your appointment or. Yeah.
So with the experiences that they've had and being in the culture they're in, what do you see in terms of empathy, in terms of hope and connection at that point?
Yeah, I think we really do. We value connection as the source of all hope, right? That it's through connecting with each other and through them connecting with themselves and really because what brought them to us has disconnected them from themselves. That's what trauma does, right? Is it takes us out of our bodies. And so to build back that sense of empathy and care, which I think naturally exists in humanity, right? Our basic need is belonging. Our basic need is that sense of connection. That once they realize that they actually have the power and the ability to nurture that, it starts to take on a life of its own. What I think we have to do as an organization often is create some structures where our staff also know that they can speak up when they're starting to feel that they're not feeling that, or when one of their coworkers, because often we see it in our coworkers before we see it in ourselves, right? And so to have a tight enough bond to be able to say, you seem off today, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that like, what do you need?
And will they do that?
Yeah, so we've built in some, and one of the things we've done is we fund self-care days. I hate the term self-care, but so actually I think maybe that did influence. I think they now call them some team wellness days.
That's great.
So they're doing things, and they'll do things as a team, and then they also have a little bit of money where they can go do things for themselves or with their family.
That's nice.
Like a massage, or it's not much, and that's like the amount of money that it costs for us is like very minimal,
right?
And some of it is just the intention of that, because then if they're not taking it as a team, then we get to have that conversation of like, hey, it seems like maybe you guys are all working hard, and can we talk about how we can support you to feel like you can take a day.
But I think what you said is key. It's setting the intention. It's knowing that it's there and that somebody's thought of it, that they've planned for it, or they want that for you.
It doesn't have to be some big self-advocacy of like, oh, please, can I go have a day to think?
No, just the fact that it's available. So that's really, really cool, really awesome. So sounds like you've always been a therapist on some level.
Probably.
Yeah. Feel that as a kid?
Yes, I did. Did you have, I had the talk to me?
Yeah.
Not just that I'll
Tell
talk.
me all your problems.
Yeah. I had the I'll talk to you and talk to me. It was both.
Right.
No, it was, I think, I said I don't ever think I'll write a book, but if I do, it'll be parenting as an empath. Because I think I just had that natural level of empathy.
Like
as a kid
in general, or just as a philosophy almost?
I don't know. Yeah, I think I've realized that as an empath, I often interrupt my kid failing because I don't want to see him fail because it hurts me. Right. I'm like, oh wait, but he needs to fail in order to learn that he can stand up, and so how do I not do that? So.
It's hard to manage that.
Yeah. But that level of empathy, I think, has always existed. And therapy was a great way to kind of harness that that skill, that natural thing,
Yeah.
and help me develop boundaries for it too, right? Like a language and a skill set, so that it wasn't like, oh, this isn't actually about me.
Do you have a hard time separating that out sometimes?
No, not anymore. I think I probably did a little bit as a child. I'm trying to think. I'm an only child too, so there was a lot of, self-reflection.
Yeah.
I'm an only child with 100 cousins, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and a mother who was determined to make sure I was not spoiled.
Oh, okay. Well, often I'll say, for me, I think therapy is a lifestyle. I've always kind of said that because I don't think you can completely make the separation if it's in your heart and your soul. If your whole purpose is a therapeutic one, you're on all the time. So it's very hard to kind of draw out those boundaries and I think even protect yourself on some level. But then sometimes I question, how much do I want to protect myself from situations that I feel like we need to feel, like kind of what you were saying earlier, so that you have the experience and you do pass it on, and you share it in other ways. Because I think a lot of that, therapeutic therapy programs, a lot of school stuff they're real strong about drawing out the boundaries, and you don't share anything with your client, and don't feel in session or any of that. But I think some of the strongest sessions that I've had as a therapist have included sharing on certain levels, and knowing when to, and using good judgment and when to do so, to have the client have a certain experience
Definitely
of it. But even beyond that is just people and whoever you touch in your life, have that experience. And it sounds like you're kind of pushing that to a corporate level almost. I like how you said CEO. You're a creative, energetic organizer. Yeah, that's awesome. So redefining that, but it's using, I think, all those skills of connection and empathy and of experience to provide an atmosphere where people feel safe to have those experiences,
Yeah, I think it's really challenging to find when I find myself in situations where empathy has been turned way down. What you were saying about kind of that post-pandemic kind of fog.
Do you notice that?
For sure. I do.
Life?
I do. And I feel like somebody, I don't even know where I've heard this, but it was talking about kind of like the bell curve of introverts and extroverts. Like you have introverts and extroverts, and then like most people land somewhere in the middle. And what the pandemic did was that it made all the people that were somewhere in the middle introverts, because they suddenly were just like practicing that side of themselves out of nature. And so here we are in this world where all these extroverts are like, come back over. And social connection, I think, requires awkwardness. It's not that I'm not awkward when I say hi to a parent. I'm just much more comfortable with being awkward.
I love that.
And so I think there's a level of how do we help people know it's okay and it's safe to be awkward again. Because that requires vulnerability. And I think for whatever reason, people are just finding themselves in this place where it's just really difficult to be vulnerable.
Right.
And for some people, it really doesn't feel safe. Like if I put myself out there, someone is targeting that part of me. And so how do I show up as my whole self if a part of me feels like it's going to be destroyed?
Right. Do you ever have that feeling, or do you?
No, I always say I'm a bridge builder. And I'm very aware that it's a lot of unearned power and privilege that enables me to be a bridge builder. That I can stand on the bridge because it doesn't. Most of the areas of my life, I'm not super worried about what anybody's going to think or do.
Yeah.
I'm relatively protected.
Yeah.
But so that enables me to kind of see what took people to their sides of the bridge. And that's the family therapist in me too, right? It's kind of like wondering like, oh, how did you get over there?
Yeah.
Like what keeps you over there?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. What would get you over here? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've been kind of thinking that it's almost my like moral mandate that that for those of us who can be on the bridge, we have to do what we can to protect staying on the bridge in order to try to stitch society back together. Because there are people on both sides who, for a number of very valid reasons, feel that they cannot come closer because it's not safe. And well, it could be safe, but it will require some work.
Do you think that's pandemic related? Do you think that's culturally related or generationally related?
That's a great question. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think maybe the pandemic triggered it, something that was already
like magnified
bubbling.
it. Yeah, I felt like the pandemic just like was a big magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Well, and then people needed connection, right?
Yeah, right.
And so the one place where it was safe to get connection was social media.
That was it, yeah.
And then social media was like, hey, let's do these algorithms that throw people into, into polarized camps.
Right.
Brene Brown had blanking on the guy she did it with, but there was like a researcher who I think is like piloting some stuff with social media that instead of pushing people toward the polarized thing would push people toward the center.
Oh, wow.
Because he's like, people are exhausted from the polarization.
Yeah.
And they actually don't want, we don't actually want that.
Right.
Most people want the center.
Right.
And so, but it's money that has driven the other thing. And so he's like, I think though that's spent. And so if we do this, it will actually be financially beneficial.
Wow.
And so he's trying to pitch something. And go find that podcast.
Okay.
And then you'll realize how wrong I am at repeating it. But, but that's the kind of thing where like, oh, that's very interesting. Like, what are the ways that we can kind of nudge people toward understanding, toward empathy, and to realize that just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that I have to cut you out of my life. I think that's something that I've learned at My Refuge House in a deeper way even than in my own kind of experience before is in this family work with our girls. I mean, very often it's a parent or a sibling who has trafficked them. And their deep desire to have some sort of reconciliation with that in a very restorative justice kind of where it's like I want you held accountable, but I also want you to know that I love you. It's just it's just kind of wrenching,
holding the polar opposites.
And then that's that complexity, right? That I can be so angry with you and I can still really love you.
I still want to be related. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Yeah. So I'm wondering if that's kind of one of the answers to what we're talking about today in terms of the disconnection of everybody is being able to hold the two opposites together and respect and love each other through that.
Yeah.
I
think so.
Yeah. So how often do you go to the Philippines? Is it quite often or?
No, I didn't go at all during the pandemic. I was there right before the pandemic started. Before that I was going, my first year I think I went 3 or 4 times. And then it kind of had petered down to 1 or 2. Now I think I'm back to 1 time a year.
Yeah. And
then we have our 2 of our staff have been able to come to the United States. And so that's been really fun.
Yeah.
And I went a little overboard, and Roseanne, who's the clinical director, she and I did a road trip from Texas to New York because that's what a person would do.
Yeah.
It's like, I think she likes me, but after this trip, she might not.
Yeah, that's quite a drive.
No, it
Yeah,
was really
yeah.
great though, because we got to see a lot of supporters and people
Oh,
along the
that's
way.
really nice. Yeah, I think that makes all the difference too.
Yeah.
People want to know how they're helping too.
Yeah, well, and what people don't often understand, and we really try to tell them, so I've been twice since the pandemic kind of eased, and our lead house parent, we call her Mama Gaga, she tells staff almost every day, hey, there are hundreds and thousands of people praying for and supporting us. We're not in this alone.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, that became her mantra to everybody. And I'd heard that, but until I was there, I didn't really feel it. And the way that they thanked me for coming back, I was like, what do you mean coming? Like, I've been in touch with Roseanne and Omar like every day.
Yeah.
And then I realized, oh, they're not talking about me.
Yeah.
They're talking about the hundreds and thousands of people around the world who support us.
Yeah.
And that's what I represented in that moment. And so I think for Roseanne to also be able to meet a lot of those people and to see their context, to then be able to take that back and say, I met some of the people who are a part of our extended family, even though we'll never meet them.
Wow.
Is powerful.
Yeah, that's terrific. So it sounds like you're really aligned with your purpose for your life.
I think so. I don't know. I don't know that I could articulate it exactly other than just like love people.
Well, it comes from it sounds like from a lot of different places. It's just a lot of, it's a lot of energy, a lot of things going on. So but it seems like it fits.
Yeah.
It's a good fit for you.
I think so. There's I'll try this out on you.
Okay.
My one of my new-ish, probably in the last year or two, I've been workshopping this idea that inside each of us we have 4 rooms. We have the thinking room, the feeling room, the doing room, and what I call the kithing room. And kithing, I've taken that from Wrinkle in Time, and it's not just relating. It's like a deeper knowing. It's the place where like you walk in and you make eye contact with your barista and you just feel seen for the day. It's just like, oh, like you see me.
Yeah.
You don't have to know anything about my life, but I feel seen in this moment.
Yeah.
So that's that space. And I think some of us are naturally equipped to hang out in one of those rooms. And it's like, we all know the people who just love to think and just like, just give me time to think. I'm clearly like a feeler. I love to just hang out and feel the feelings. So there are rooms that are bigger for each of us than other rooms.
Right.
And to me, the sense of health and wholeness is having access to those rooms. Yeah. So that's something that I've kind of brought to therapy lately, is kind of asking people and exploring, like, is there a room that you're really comfortable hanging out in? Because that can be home base, and we can make sure that feels cozy and comfortable. Right. But let's not get stuck there. Let's make sure that you haven't blocked the door to your other rooms. Yeah. And what can we do to make it safe to kind of get to, because that's where wholeness comes in, is having access to those.
So kind of using metaphors and stories and stuff too.
And mixing them horribly. So, yes.
No, it's great. I think it's a great way to approach therapy with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it removes them from being the center of it. It allows them to just
kind of look at themselves.
Yeah. Look outside of that. Whereas I think trauma brings you so focused inward that it becomes, who you are. And I think you said something in your resume about that one of the gifts that you had, as you grew up or you realized was not identifying the person as their problem or as their symptom. We're talking about physical therapy.
Yeah. So when I did sports medicine all through high school and college, and athletes. Well, I thought I was going to be a physical therapist. Yeah. And then my dad was like, "Can you see yourself doing this for the rest of your life? Yeah. Not that you have to do it the rest of your life, but you should feel that passion now." Yeah. So there's that passion piece. And I was like, "Oh, yeah. And then 3 hours later, I was still thinking about the question. I was like, why am I thinking about this? And then I realized, like, the athletes would often say, you've helped. Thank you for helping me to remember that I'm more than just an athlete, that I'm more than just my injury. Yeah. And you really helped me get through this experience. I was like, oh, maybe it's not just the physical piece.
That's terrific. So that really applies now
Yeah, I think
to
so.
what you're doing, too.
Definitely, yeah. You're more than your trauma. You're more
right, right. It's bigger. It's a bigger world, yeah. So, future, what do you see for yourself?
It's a great question. I don't really know. I don't, my mom is somebody I feel like had her life planned out from the day she was born, and that's the way that it's gone, because she's just that person. And I think I've always known that I would just be with people, and but I never saw myself living in California. I'm from Virginia. I'm from the mountains of Virginia.
Oh, wow.
My dad did live here in the 60s, but even after all of his stories, I never thought I would. I mean, California was just so far away.
Yeah.
Never saw myself working in an organization in the Philippines, so
Wow.
I think I try to just stick to the purpose, and trust that whatever's supposed to come will unfold. Even though I'm also not the person who's like, well, what's meant to be will be. Like, that's not my philosophy. But I'm kind of open to the possibilities, I guess.
Trusting the process a
Yeah.
little. Yeah.
I do love, like, I love doing therapy. I'm not doing a lot of therapy right now. I also have really loved doing leadership development and coaching with people. I'm going in a few weeks to work with a higher ed group for a state government, just kind of do some strengths coaching with their team.
Oh, wow, terrific.
Yeah, so it's fun. It's kind of a fun way to bring family therapy to corporations. Without them always fully realizing that that's what they're getting.
Again, the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm open to that. We've done some consulting with other organizations. A lot of smaller organizations don't always have the resources to invest in their people, because it's easy to raise money to build a building. And we feel very fortunate that we have a group of supporters who by and large understand our investment in the people who then help the girls. And so we're able to do that. And then we also have a group of people who understand that we want to invest in other organizations. We don't have money to give them, but we can invest our wisdom. And so that maybe they don't have to learn lessons the hard way, and we can help them to kind of jump through those hurdles to provide quality care.
No, that's terrific.
Yeah.
That's really great. Well, I just want to thank you for
Thanks for
coming out
doing
today
that. No, I
and
love
doing this, and it
I've
means
been telling
a lot.
people about. I just think that having caring and connection and hearing from different people who are tapping into that passion is amazing.
Yeah, that's how I feel, and personally, it instills my hope, keeps it there, and
you're literally tending to the soul of a community, I think, in doing this, and
thank you,
and it's much needed.
Thank you.